gets to sit down and actually talk to somebody who wants common sense gun reform and is him or herself a very responsible gun owner. Mm-hmm. Right. I think to have the talk to begin with, yeah, once you actually get that conversation going, that there's a lot of common ground. And that's something that I love about Texas. Is why I wanted to move back so quickly, because it is so diverse that you just do not, it's just not an experience that you get in a lot of other parts of the country. I mean, we segregate ourselves here by race and economics and age, just like everyone everywhere else in the country. But Texas has just kind of this individualistic spirit that, and from that comes a live and let live kind of mentality that even when we segregate, it's not, it just isn't so extreme that people don't necessarily, well, at least when I was growing up, take those differences so personally. You can agree to disagree and just agree on, drinking a beer together in the back porch. And, you can, you can have two very different opinions about politics, but still root for the same football teams. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's just something I really wanted. That's why I wanted to come back here and raise my family. But also why, I feel it's very necessary to participate in things like Indivisible Austin and represent these points of view as we kind of form what we want the future to look like.
Yeah, and so you've mentioned how diverse Texas is, and you said at the beginning of the segment that you speak Vietnamese. So can you talk a little bit about what diversity actually looks like in Texas? I think a lot of people, when they think about Texas, just think about white population and Hispanic population and don't think more broadly than that about what diversity looks like.
Well, we sure do have a lot of white people and we sure do have a lot of Hispanic people. So that is true. Not all of the stereotypes about Texas are not true. We do wear cowboy boots, unironically, and our beer culture is strong and we prefer beer over wine. I mean, these things are very true, right? But here, I think people don't realize, for example, when we talk about immigration, how nuanced, how different that conversation has to take place here. Like something like 1 out of 6 Texans are born abroad. And in Dallas, where I grew up, it's like 1 in 4, which in Texas is so big that when we're talking about, with 6 of us are being born abroad, more than 1/10 of all the foreign-born people in the United States are right here. So when we're talking about dreamers, 800,000 of them are here in Texas. So if DACA ends, like really, really ends, like people are already getting deported here. I don't know if everyone knows that yet, but if people aren't going to start getting deported in March. People are already, their DACA status is already expiring. Their DACA applications are already being denied and people are already being deported. So if all 800,000 of these dreamers left, it would shake this state to the core. We're talking about 800,000 young people getting ready or just bought their first homes, 800,000 people who are actively contributing to the economy, like beginning their savings, starting out their careers in industries all over the state. We're talking about workhorses in the tech industry. We're talking about the next generation of entrepreneurs. To think about the DREAM Act not passing here in Texas is a catastrophic outcome. But at the same time, when I say like a lot of the things that people say about Texas are true, for example, we do have Confederate memorials at our Texas state capitol. But a lot of people don't realize that we also have a giant Tejano memorial on our Texas state capitol, right? Because Texas did used to be Mexico, right? The founders of Texas are Tejanos. So I actually make that joke. I live in a Hispanic neighborhood and I don't look Hispanic, I look Asian. But I grew up here and I speak fluent Spanish. And so people will be like, oh my God, you speak Spanish? And I would be like, yeah, like what? I don't look Tejano to you? So we're talking about numbers like less than half of Texans are white, actually. I mean, well, okay. If you talk about white, Hispanic, and white with no Hispanic, extraction, then we're talking about almost 80%. So most people are white, more than half of people are white. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those people are actually Hispanic white. When you're talking about not Hispanic white, that's actually less than half of the population. So about 42%. So talk about not Hispanic white, about 42%, and Hispanic is like 39%. So we're talking about almost close to the same amount of people. And then the rest of us, Black, Asian, multiracial, Native American, we fall in after that.
The other thing I wanted to be sure to talk to you about, we had talked earlier and you had mentioned how important the not just urban-rural divide is, but the urban-suburban-rural divide. And Texas, of course, is just huge. It's enormous. And so I think it's important to think about what that means. So could you expand a little bit on that and sort of what's important to know about suburban Texas as well?
Well, it's not so much that suburban Texas is different than I think suburban anywhere else. So what's so interesting about Texas is how much like everywhere else we actually are, in the sense that what happens here is often a bellwether for what's about to happen everywhere else. It just things happen on such a bigger scale here. Like the SB4, about whether local police officers needed to comply with requests by ICE, by federal requests from ICE. Everyone in the nation was kind of watching that, because where Texas goes, the rest of the country tends to follow. So everywhere in America, I feel like, needs to understand that it wasn't merely a rural urban divide. Like, just by definition, there are not enough people in rural America to put somebody like Trump into office, right? It was really the suburbs of America that turned out to vote and put Trump into office. And the reason why is because the economic growth that we have experienced after the recovery from the 2008 crash did not touch the suburbs. That is largely happened in urban centers. So in Texas, why that's important is because we have so many suburbs. We have so many of the country's largest cities, and therefore so many of the country's largest suburbs, and so much. There's just so much of Texas where the state of Texas is the size of France. Some of our congressional districts are the size of other states. So we're talking about, we have 3 of the top 10 cities. I live in Austin, which is the 11th largest city in America. Of the 20 largest cities in America, there's 6 of them are here. San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso in there. That's where the Senate contender Beto O'Rourke is from. It's from El Paso, Texas. So for each of these cities, there are massive suburbs all around them. And it's really hard to organize because of the way that we are gerrymandered. Again, one of the first states to gerrymander in a way to basically guarantee Republicans their victories, no matter how the demographics changed for a very long time. And it became the playbook for how other states should redraw their lines in order to maintain Republican power. So where I live in Austin, the suburb that's next to me is not in my congressional district, so I can't organize with them. The suburbs that are in my congressional districts are 3 hours east of me and touch into almost reach Harris County, which is where Houston, Texas is, hours away. And then in between is a big stretch of rural towns. So it's almost as if they did that on purpose.
Almost.
Almost, right? So the physical logistics, just think about the physical logistics of organizing, first of all. A congressional district, you're in your urban area where you've got, where you're able to get resources, where you're able to throw fundraisers, where you're able to do things that living in close proximity to people allow you to do in terms of organizing. And then you're 3 hours away from the next suburb in your district. And that's not even the most egregious one. I used to live 10 minutes up the road from where I am. So I was in another district, because there is no anchoring congressional district in Austin, Texas. So I used to live just 10 minutes up the road, and I was in a different congressional district that stretched all the way up to Fort Worth, Texas, which is ground zero for the Tea Party. So that is all to say, we are Indivisible Austin. We do our best to support the congressional district-based Indivisibles. There's 6 congressional districts that cut through Austin, Texas. Our one county, Travis County, is kind of what people know of as Austin, Texas. Not the only county that cuts through here. But there's 5 that cut through Travis County alone, right? And then the next county over, it's like one of our districts. So in Austin, Texas, they cut us up on purpose, right? We don't have any one person representing us. So Indivisible Austin try to leverage everything that we can get in the city to support people in these congressional districts. And the people in the congressional districts, their group leaders tend to be residents within the city limits of Austin. They and us and many Indivisibles across the country have not figured out yet how to do outreach and organize in the suburbs. But when we do, right, that's but we have to. There's really no choice. I compare it to, my family were refugees from the Vietnam War. I compare it to what was happening in Hanoi and Saigon at the time. At the time, it's called Saigon. Today, it's called Ho Chi Minh City. That's where I would say the diplomacy right? Kind of the political talk where the diplomats and the journalists would go in and all the talk about the conflict would happen. But all the bloodshed was actually in central Vietnam. And I think when we're talking about the resistance, the cities is where all the diplomacy and the talk, right, and the media, and our podcasts and our pretty meetings happen. But the front lines is in the suburbs, and we don't have a whole lot of time to figure out how to put boots on the ground yet.
Yeah, it seems like some of it's going to have to be digital strategy too, because I mean, you're right. How can you possibly organize when there isn't a center of the district and it may be 3-4 hours away to get to, the other parts of the district? But yeah, that's going to be a big challenge. I think that's a big challenge facing a lot of places. So if you figure it out, let us know.
I already talked to folks, like when I meet folks from other areas, right, they try to talk about geography. Like Central Texas is a very distinct geography, beautiful rolling hills. You wouldn't believe it, but we actually have some really good wineries out here. Welcome y'all to come visit, So in Texas, when you think of Texas geography, you're thinking about that we have really diverse ecosystems, right? We have the Gulf, but we also have the desert. We also have the plains. We also have the hills in Central Texas, right? We have really diverse geography, which leads to very diverse economies, which leads to really different interests, even if you are in the so-called same party as someone else. But I will say that somebody in Plano, Texas, which is a very international suburb of Dallas, Texas, Sugar Land, Texas, a very international suburb of Houston, Texas, right? And Georgetown, here just north of Austin, Texas, organizers from those three places, even though they're in very different geographies, they're all very similarly sized suburbs, very similar demographic suburbs. And when we talk about digital organizing, I would love to see organizers from these kinds of suburbs all over the country. I think there in Chicago, y'all, I think what's comparable would be called Evanston, maybe? Mm-hmm. That's just my guess. That if somebody from Evanston, Evanston Indivisible and Plano Indivisible and Sugar Land Indivisible, and also connected with Westchester Indivisible, which Westchester, New York, that's a suburb that's doing amazing things. You guys should look up the work that they're doing. I've definitely been stealing ideas, from there to connect digitally those people. That would be a really powerful resource for organizers there. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about mobilizing actual residents, You've got to be face to face with these people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Ivy, I don't want to keep you from your bourbon too long. So is there anything else that you want to make sure that our listeners know about Texas?
Yes, I do. There's one more thing I wanted you guys to understand about Texas I think people outside of Texas think that we're more extreme than we are. And it's because our primaries are relatively easy to game. And partly that is because we do not have very friendly voter registration laws. The deadline to vote in our March 5th primary was actually a couple weeks ago in early February. So you got to register a month in advance. But the deadline to declare your candidacy was just in January. So you only have you have a month of campaigning before the deadline to register to vote for that primary, and then just another month later is that's it. That's the primary. So only people who are very engaged end up turning out. So it really doesn't take that many people. It just takes a very dedicated group of, for example, the Tea Party to turn to completely make it so that there are no bad choices from their perspective, or maybe from our perspective, no good choices when it comes time for the general election.
That is a really early primary.
Yeah.
In Illinois, we have a pretty early primary as well. We'll be in a little over a month, March 20th. But I looked up, in fact, when we were planning out our schedule of which states we were going to talk to when, I looked at the primary calendars to see which ones we were going to hit before primaries and after primaries. And I was like, whoa, Texas is really early.
Yeah. And the deadline to register to vote is already passed. So breakneck speed. We are stressed out about it. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, whenever we're stressed out about things like, oh, we didn't register enough voters, in our opinion, or we didn't get enough voter registration drives, set up, we have to remember that here in Texas, I think we know the story really well. I don't know what other parts of the world think, because this is just my home. This is my home. This is a place I love. But Trump's agenda is something, what is the so-called Trump agenda has been happening here for well over a decade. I would say almost closer to 20 years. So Trump did not come up with any of this stuff, okay? and most of these things were happening at the state level for a really long time, and not just in Texas. We didn't invent this stuff. I think we just innovated it so that it was, so that Republicans could duplicate it